welcome to this special podcast, this episode of SNJ in Conversation, with me, Tania Tirraoro.
And me, Renata Blower. We're both directors of Special Needs Jungle. Today, it's our pleasure to have a conversation with the Children and Families Minister with responsibility for SEND, Will Quince MP. When he took up his post in autumn 2021, Mr Quince was given the task of steering home the SEND review, which had been languishing within the Department for Education for 2 years, including a period while officials were redeployed to deal with schools being locked down.
6 months on, in March 2022, a SEND review green paper and consultation was launched, which is where we are now. You may have already seen all the articles and the resources that we've been producing to help you try to understand it and respond, and we hope they're proving useful. So Will Quince, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, and thank you very much for having me.
We can't hope to discuss every element of the green paper, of course, and we do have a webinar coming up, so we'll just look at a few areas in greater detail. Firstly, you've been doing non-stop engagement about the green paper, meeting parents, children and professionals. How do you feel the review has been received so far?
Well, thank you. It's really important, and actually it's the most enjoyable bit of my job, getting out there and meeting with children and young people with SEND and their parents, carers, and those who have experience of the system. I mean, as you know, there was a huge amount of engagement in the run up to the launch of the green paper in March. It's something from day one in this job I was determined to do, to reach out and listen to as many people with lived experience of the system as possible. And I think broadly, the review has landed really, really well. It doesn't mean that there aren't areas that people don't have concerns about, or they have further questions about. That's perfectly understandable. And from the very beginning of the process, I think I even said to both of you, I'm really conscious that we're not going to be able to please everyone with every single one of the asks that they have. But the aim is to get this into as best a place as we possibly can, where the vast majority of people are happy with the direction of travel and have that sense of reassurance that we are heading in the right direction and we're bringing about the change that they want to see. So I think generally it's been very well received, but of course there are some questions. And I think the reason we went with a green paper and not a white paper is because it is a genuine consultation, and it's open. And as you know, I extended it to the 22nd of July. I really want as many people as possible to take part in that, to help us shape the review and the reforms that we're hoping to make. I think we've had somewhere between 700 and 800 submissions so far, but of course I want more and would encourage as many people to take part as possible.
You don't have ours yet, we're still working on it, but parents have said to us that navigating complaints procedures and making appeals seem to them to almost be a new kind of waiting list, getting their support for children further down the road. And if you can't do that kind of complaining or appealing, then your children are not as likely to get the support. So what can be done now, and as a result of the proposals, to help get the quality of initial assessments and of decision making that would save everybody a lot of time and money? What is in the proposals, and what can you do now?
Yeah, thank you, and I look forward to your submission, because I know that you represent a number of people, and you've got some strong views on the review so far. And I'm sort of expecting a late flurry, if you like, which often happens with consultations of this nature. The question you raise is a really good one, and I've heard from parents and carers about, as you set out, about how lengthy, stressful, and often expensive the tribunal process can be, and I suppose just seeking redress more generally. So that's exactly why we're seeking to tackle it. And I am looking at what we can do in the here and now, but more broadly as part of the review. I genuinely think that the measures that we're proposing as part of the review will lead to improvements in both processes, and really importantly, families' experiences too. So, for example, just picking three things really. The first would be national standards. So having national standards for the first time across education, health and care, with the aim being to drive consistency, sort of ending that sort of postcode lottery and improving clarity wherever you live. And that importantly would include a standard around the identification of needs to help improve, all importantly, that early identification. the second, I know we've discussed this before, and the key is actually how this is delivered locally, but local inclusion partnerships and dashboards, so that parents know what they can expect and how and who they can hold to account. And then finally, being clear on the roles and responsibilities for people working in the system. And importantly, that has to be at every level. And then if I can just add one more final one, I know I said three, but I'll add one more, which is also around improving the EHC process. So standardizing it, digitizing it. And I know I'll just add one more as well, because I know I said three, I've gone to five now. But the other one would be around mediation. And I know this is a more controversial area, but I do genuinely believe that mediation has a stronger role to play in the system. And, you know, there is evidence to suggest that in the majority of cases, it's effective. So that's why it's in the review, and it's something I'm looking at. But I'm also aware that there are parents that are, understandably, I get it, because of their own experiences, concerned about that too.
One of the proposals is for all schools to be multi-academy trusts with a specialist school and an alternative provision school in each. How do you prevent them from shunting children with SEND, identified or not, around the trust from mainstream to AP and back, rather than take the time to assess and ensure that they have the right provision? So what we're asking really is how will you stop it being a merry-go-round?
Yeah, it's a really good question, something we absolutely have to avoid. I mean, I think in terms of alternative provision, wherever possible, if it's absolutely key that being excluded from school is never being excluded from education. And with alternative provision, we want alternative provision providers to work really closely with mainstream schools to make sure that wherever possible, children and young people are back into mainstream as quickly as possible, if that's the right place for them. But I mean, you're right to point to the school's white paper, and in terms of the plans around multi-academy trusts and academies. And a fundamental principle of our reforms is that children and young people get the right support in the right place at the right time, and that will underpin absolutely everything we do. And at the heart of that has to be a strong mainstream sector, and we'll achieve that through a number of things. So the first is greater investment in schools and other provision. As I touched on, in introducing national standards, the introduction of local inclusion plans, really strong accountability and redress mechanisms. And then the other key one, I think, and we've discussed this in the past, is equipping local authorities with new backstop powers to direct admissions in mainstream schools and academies. But I think there's that other fundamental point, because I talk a lot about mainstream because parents do say to me, look, wherever possible, we want our child or young person with SEND in a mainstream setting, but getting the support that they need, so that we have confidence that they're getting the best education, that they'll be able to go on and fulfill their education. But I'm also clear that mainstream provision just isn't right for everyone, and that's why we also need strong special settings and, importantly, alternative provision for those who need it.
Just to follow up on that, you've talked about a number of the key proposals, but there isn't much detail about that. Obviously, you're consulting, you're hoping that people will bring you some ideas. How is that going to be developed from there on?
Yeah, Tania, really good question. And you're right. Some of the questions, and we've left deliberately vague, because we set out sort of a direction of travel, but I'm conscious that I don't have lived experience of SEND. You know, I think, you know, my wife's a primary school teacher and a trained SENCO. I have a little bit of experience through her and through my experience speaking with teachers and head teachers and parents, and of course children and young people with SEND. But it's really important we listen to those with lived experience to help us shape how we actually implement. So setting out a direction of travel is one thing, but then how you deliver it is another. And you know, if there's one thing I'm really acutely aware of, is that the 2014 SEND reforms were fundamentally not bad. In fact, I genuinely think the ambition and aspiration and direction of travel was good, but clearly the implementation was poor. And that's something I'm keen to make sure we get right this time. So the plan is, once the consultation closes on the 22nd of July, it's very much about analysing that and then continuing to listen to parents, carers, children and young people with SEND, and those who have experience of the system, as we then develop an implementation plan. And that implementation plan will be launched by the end of this year. And that's really when, I'm determined that we just keep listening and keep engaging with all those who have that lived experience, so we get the implementation right.
So the DfE also seems to be taking on a much greater direct responsibility in many areas. How are you going to ensure that officials are properly trained and resourced? I know you've got your regions plan, but how will you get the people who know how to do this? And who will hold the DfE to account if things go wrong?
Yeah, great question, Tanya. I think people will want there to be more national direction. That's certainly a message I hear really clearly from parents, for all the reasons that I set out earlier, and that isn't the same as more government direct responsibility per se, certainly insofar as it relates to the sort of needs of individual families. But what we are doing is bringing together our regionally based functions by working closely with schools, with special educational needs and disability and children's social care sectors, and those place-based roles supporting our education investment areas. And what this should do, and the aim is that the approach is to give us a real greater understanding and oversight of local authorities, which should improve our ability to hold them to account. So as much as anything, it's our ability to hold local authorities and schools and others to account. In terms of the sort of direct steps that we'll be taking and I'll be taking, so the plan is to set up a national delivery board, which will oversee the delivery of our reforms. And I think, we've set aside £70 million specifically for implementation. And in terms of that delivery board, I've been really clear, it has to include representatives sort of across the SEND and AP sectors, and really importantly, families, which I think will be a really good mechanism for keeping and holding the government to account. And, as I've always said I will do and we will do, we'll be working with a wide range of partners and listening to a wide range of partners, of course, at the heart of that, including parents, as we develop more detailed work as we go along.
So not just the NNPCF then for parents?
I'm really clear, and we've got to engage much wider. It's really, really important to me.
Now, you briefly mentioned children's social care, and we've seen that the Children's Social Care Review didn't say a lot about disabled children, unfortunately. How has the SEND review team worked collaboratively with health and social care on creating the proposals in the Green Paper? And would you say that the consultation team is cross-department?
Yeah, so I think we've tried to get it as close to that as we possibly can. And I love to say that it isn't a challenge, but it is. Of course it is, because ultimately, yes, I work with my counterpart at the Department for Health and Social Care. You'll have noticed the SEND Green Paper is co-authored by both the Secretary of State for Education and the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care. And I've spent a lot of time and a great deal of time talking with and working closely with my counterparts at the DHSC, as have officials at all levels as we've developed these proposals. And that is also the same with NHSE and health leaders and practitioners, and that will continue throughout the consultation. The reason I say it's a challenge is because it's got to remain an integral part of how this moves forward, and in agreeing our response to the consultation, in developing our delivery plan and implementing it and reviewing it. But I'm acutely aware, speaking with parents and carers and those at a local level, that the intent that we set at a national level, working alongside my counterpart at the Department of Health and Social Care, it's also really key that we get total buy-in at a local level from integrated care systems and clinical commissioning groups. And the reason it's a bit more complicated is, of course, they don't entirely align, in many cases don't align at all, with top-tier local authorities. So it does make it more challenging, but it's something that I'm determined to get on top of, because I know that it's really, really important that health are as invested in the SEND review and the reforms that we're looking to make as we are in education. And I'm also acutely aware that many children and young people with SEND have specific health needs. And I know that far too often, speaking with parents, they tell me that families don't experience that join up across services that they should do. So it is, as far as I'm concerned, absolutely critical that my department and the Department for Health and Social Care work pretty much hand in glove. That's probably the best way I can describe it, to tackle this. And I get that, and I think I know that they get that. But the key is going to make sure that we have laser-like focus in terms of our delivery plan and implementation plan about working alongside health to deliver it, and not something where we're working in silos.
And just to follow up from that, would that mean then the accountability side, you'll also be checking that health and social care are sticking to what they're meant to be doing as well as education?
Yeah, and I think that's really, really, really important. And I think the local inclusion plans and local inclusion dashboards, and for the first time in many areas, having more oversight and visibility around things like waiting times for speech and language and other therapies are going to be really important. But you may also have noticed we've Ofsted have published a new consultation on a SEND inspection framework, and that's Ofsted and the CQC, with a view to launching that in early 2023. And the key there is going to be at the heart of that, speaking with Amanda Spielman at Ofsted and others, is making sure that parents' voices at a local level are very, very much heard.
And actually those proposals, when we ran an article on this, they're actually not bad. I mean, and they do listen to parents. I'm on their advisory board, and they are surprisingly good proposals. So
I'm really pleased to hear that. And again, I'd encourage as many people as possible, please take part in that consultation, which is live now.
But it does underline, the Green Paper underlines the importance of providing SEND children with the resources they need, of course, to access education. But how do you intend to hold those health, education and social care providers that fall outside the remit of the LGA and the tribunal to account? And for example, will you make the tribunal's national trial permanent and all decisions enforceable?
So that is the tough bit, and you're right. It's almost the $1 million question. And I talked earlier about the national standards we're developing, and those standards will set really clear standards at every level across education, health, and care. And in terms of our proposals, you'll know that we're proposing health and care partners play a really crucial role in the new local inclusion partnerships. That's absolutely key. And these will set out local plans for the support that children and families need, which will include health and care needs. And I touched on them a little bit earlier, the introduction of new and national, so local and national dashboards for 0 to 25, which will set out really clear performance data and metrics for the system. And that will include children's community health services. Now, the challenge, of course, there is that we're going to need individual integrated care systems to buy into this. But I think having those dashboards and parents and health all around the table at a local level is going to make a difference. Of course, it's key that the chief exec of that ICS and the leadership team there really buy into the importance of this, and we'll be putting a lot of emphasis on that. And
you think they will? Have you had indications that they will?
So yes, because I think they do understand the importance of this, and certainly that is the clear direction from us and from the Department of Health and Social Care. And we've been working really closely with DHSC on statutory guidance that will set out really clearly how statutory responsibility for SEND should be discharged within those integrated care systems. And this will, if you like, set out that integrated care boards should identify, and this is why I mentioned the sort of chief exec and leadership team, an executive lead at board level for special educational needs and disabilities. So I think there is of course an element of optimism on my side that integrated care systems will take this as seriously as we do. But I think we've by putting in those measures, it will make that happen. But, as with so many of these reforms, we can put in the procedures and the processes, but so much of this is actually about cultural shift and cultural change at a local level, not just within education and local authorities, but also within local care systems too.
How do you manage that? I mean, that's what has been trying to be happen since 2014. And it is very slowly, I have to say, very slowly moving in that direction. But how do you accelerate that? How do you get those hearts and minds in the right place?
So it's a great question, and it's one I am battling with, and hence why in the conversations we've had, I'm constantly saying how there's the sort of carrot and the stick approach, isn't there? In that, the carrot, we want to, as much as possible, just set out why this is absolutely the right thing to do, not just for society more generally at a local and national level, but to improve those outcomes for children and young people with SEND, which is so important, and getting that buy-in so we can set that clear direction, but then also making sure that there are really clear redress and accountability mechanisms in the system. And there are still question marks over whether we've gone far enough in that. And I hope I'm not being naive in thinking that at a local level, both at local authority and integrated care systems, that they are as passionate as I am about delivering this change that we want to see. I think there is a huge appetite for it, but I think there has been a culture which you're well aware of, Tania, Renata, at a local level, at local authorities and within health, which is a million miles from where we want it to be. So it is going to take us some time, but we have got that time as part of the implementation plan. And you'll know as well as I that we're going to need some legislation, but actually a lot of it isn't going to require legislation, and it's going to be cultural change. And we've just got to keep hammering home the messages and the reasons why this is such an important thing for them to grip and get on top of.
Special Needs Jungle, we've worked hard on getting people to talk about and consider issues around race, intersectionality and special educational needs. And your team is soon to carry out meetings with families from ethnic and marginalised communities, which is great. How will the consultation act on mitigating the joint intersectional impacts of race, disability and disadvantage?
Yeah, thank you, Renata. I mean, you as an organisation have led on this, and I'm very grateful for you for having done so. The green paper, I suppose, it is probably more focused on broader level reform. But look, this is of course a really important issue, one that you flagged and one that needs looking at properly. So, as I say, I'm really grateful for you for raising it. The consultation, I hope, provides the mechanism for drawing out these kinds of issues and for trying to ensure that our system and the reforms that we're hoping to make to it take full account of them. And I'm certainly determined that we reach out to as wide a range of groups and communities as possible, and many of whom are not often heard enough. And I'm not just talking about reaching out during this consultation period. It's important that we continue this dialogue as we move forward. In fact, it's critical that we continue this dialogue as we move forward with the implementation of the reform. So I'm really grateful for you for doing this, and of course to the other organisations that you're working with to help us take forward this important work. And as you know, we're having a number of workshops. Many have happened already, and there are a lot more to come in July, to both look at the report that you've produced really helpfully and to try and better understand the perspectives of families from these communities. But I'm certainly acutely aware that we need to do more in this space.
I mean, obviously talking is great, but action is what people really want, especially when they're giving their time to kind of talk about quite traumatic things that have happened. Has there been any discussion within the government about perhaps looking at specific training or guidance around this, or even changing legislation in order to protect people?
So at this point, no. And I think it's although we're sort of starting to develop our thinking, I think it would be premature to do any of that work before we've had the full results of the consultation. But the 22nd of July is sort of fast approaching, and then it will be our job to analyse those, pick out some of the key themes, and as I say, I'm hugely grateful for everyone that is taking part and sharing their lived experience of the system. And it is so critical and valued in terms of helping us to really hone our reforms and make sure that what we're proposing is, as much as we possibly can, addressing some of these concerns that parents have.
So in the proposals, you've tackled SENCO training for early years and changing the training at SENCO level. But what about initial teacher training and existing teachers? As you will know now, it's vital to ensure that emerging SEND is noted early. And for SEN support to work, it's really important that teachers understand how to do that. So what plans are there to embed SEND as a central tenet of initial teacher training? And for example, to make annual CPD for SEND mandatory?
Yeah, Tanya, really good question, and it's one I've been thinking about a lot. And I think it's important that we stress every teacher is a teacher of SEND, but there are so many teachers that I've spoken to who have said to me they just don't feel well equipped or confident in teaching children with special education needs or disabilities. And so I agree with you. It's so important that all teachers are equipped and vitally have the confidence to provide that support for children and young people with SEND and in alternative provision. And I want those delivering education to get the best possible training available. So yes, I'm looking at initial teacher training and what more we can do in that space. As you noted in the review, we're also looking at the introduction of a new SENCO MPQ, National Professional Qualification for school SENCOs. And I suppose that I'd be interested in your views about whether that should sit alongside the existing SENCO qualification or replace it. And that's something very much in my thoughts at the moment. And then the other plan is, because you're so right about early identification, increasing the number of staff with an accredited level 3 SENCO qualification in early years settings. But in my mind, and again I suppose I'm biased because my wife's a trained SENCO, and I think when you look back to the 2014 reforms, the aspiration, in fact the clear steer, was that SENCOs should sit on the senior leadership team of schools. They should be an integral part and really important part of schools to really embed that inclusivity and inclusive approach to the whole school. In too many cases, that's not the case. In too many cases, you have SENCOs who haven't completed the qualification because they haven't been in post for 3 years, or they're moved on a rota within those 3 years. That concerns me, and I'm looking at ways I can address that. Personally, I'd love to see every head teacher in our country have a SENCO qualification, because I think leadership starts from the very top. And if you have a head teacher who really pushes throughout their school a clear message of this is an inclusive school, then you're more likely to see the behavior through the school in terms of culture that we all want to see. And then more broadly, I think I've been pushing the team, and we'll continue to use the evidence from our What Works program to inform quality first teaching for all pupils, regardless of the setting. And then it's all well and good saying that, but we've got to back that up too. So we'll be supporting that with some financial investment, which will include the investment, of course, in the sort of core schools budget, and then of course an additional £1 billion as part of the high needs budget. But this is an area around initial teacher training and SENCO qualifications where I'd be really interested in people sharing their thoughts and experience of the system on whether what we're proposing is about right or whether we need to go further.
I mean, you said that there was a clear steer for them to be on the senior leadership team, and I think maybe that needs to actually be mandated, because in too many cases, not only is the SENCO not on the senior leadership team, they never even see a SEND budget.
I agree with you. I think the SENCO is one of, if not the most important role in a school, second to the head teacher, in terms of that sort of leadership and setting a culture within a school. So it's something. Please feed in please feed into the consultation. And it's you can probably tell it's something I'm passionate about and I'm giving some serious thought and consideration to. And the views of those who have that experience of the system at a grassroots level and that lived experience will be really helpful in terms of honing my thinking.
One of the things you mentioned earlier that's been strongly opposed is the proposal for mandatory mediation, particularly with concerns that it would delay access to appeal. What evidence was used to formulate this proposal, and why does the DfE think it's a good idea when even professional mediators don't think it's necessary? And also, are you working with the SEND tribunal on this?
Yeah, thank you, Renata. It's a really good question. And I know this is probably one of the more controversial areas of the review in terms of our proposal. And I think the first thing is just to sort of step back a moment and say, I completely understand, having met with parents and children and young people who have been let down by the system and have had to fight and fight and fight what is by its nature, sadly, a very adversarial system, why this is being looked at through a very cynical lens, or because people are very jaded by their experience. I completely get that, and I want to give an assurance about why I and we are proposing this as a measure. But I think, again, it's really important to stress that it's a green paper, not a white paper, and this is something that no decision has been taken on, and I'm really open-minded to it. And so I understand why people are questioning the proposed approach on mediation, and I welcome the challenge, and I genuinely want to hear what people have to say about this. First and foremost, I want to reduce the need for disputes to arise in the first place, and the logic behind the measures we're proposing, such as national standards to improve clarity and consistency, I think will help us to achieve that. In terms of your specific question on evidence, so we've heard from many people, especially parents, I certainly have, about how difficult and how expensive the tribunal process can be, and it's important that we reflect that and respond to that in the review. And then we've also looked at evidence around mediation, as I mentioned earlier. So more than 70% of disputes that go through mediation are resolved through that process, so resolved earlier. And the use of mediation has increased significantly in recent years, from less than, I think it was something like 2,000 in 2016 to more than 5,000 last year. I'm also aware that things like waiting for a SEND tribunal hearing can take significantly longer than mediation. So the tribunal has a performance measure that 75% of appeals should be brought to hearing and the decision issued within 22 weeks. And so we're working with the tribunal on this, and with others, including parents and children and young people. And I want to work with people through the consultation and afterwards to develop the details so that it works as well as it can. So I suppose I understand the reservation. I'm very much in listening mode on this, and I understand that there is a contrary view to the one that I've just set out, and I would encourage people to share that, because I genuinely mean it when I say I'm not wedded to this idea. The intention is to try and reduce the adversarial nature of the system with regards to that tribunal process and resolve disputes earlier. But if people have other views, share them with me. It will help inform my thinking.
I mean, for mediation to work, you need the people in the room to be decision makers, because otherwise you're just wasting people's time, aren't you? If you're sat down talking about things and you find out the people you're talking to actually have no power at all. So is that something you've considered, that perhaps in order for mediation to work, then the right people need to be turning up to the meetings?
Well, on that, I totally agree with you. And for mediation to work, you have to be able to seek a resolution at that point, which is sometimes a compromise of some description, but it is something where both parties walk away feeling that their views have been heard and respected and responded to. And then, of course, there is always the option to progress onto tribunal. So I'm very, very much in listening mode on this.
I've been hearing lately some phrases such as less emphasis on compliance and more on excellence. But surely those two go hand in hand. So shouldn't there be equal emphasis on both? I mean, there is existing legislation that already creates minimum standards. It's just not adhered to. as we know. So there's now fears from parents I've been hearing that local areas aren't going to be held to account for breaking the law, or that existing laws such as assessment criteria will be loosened. What reassurances can you give parents?
Okay, well, let me just say at the outset, I completely agree with you. The two very much go hand in hand, and it's important that we get the balance right on this. And I talked earlier about sort of some of the things that we're doing to improve accountability and clarity and consistency. And I genuinely think these things will help to incentivize people to achieve excellence in the system, while at the same time give families a clearer idea of what they can expect from the system. And I also think that these things will help to drive compliance.
Free support services such as SNJ are vital for families. How will the proposals ensure that they're properly funded for the long term and stop LAs trying to prevent SNJ staff from, for example, supporting parents at tribunal when this is part of their role?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I completely understand, having spoken with parents, how important it is that they're able to access the advice and support, and importantly, advice and support that they can trust. And I think it's just as important, in saying that, for children and young people too. And as you know, the sort of Send Information, Advice and Support service and services they're statutory in their basis, and local authorities have to ensure that they have one. And the evidence we have from local services themselves is that more and more are meeting standards, which includes being seen by service users as being impartial and confidential and separate from the local authority, which is absolutely key. And that's that is consistently being reflected in Ofsted's reports. But I'm conscious that we have a way to go on this, and we're continuing to provide support for local services nationally, and particularly in support of things like training.
One of the things that's been repeatedly mentioned over the years, I mean, it's whenever you look at a Twitter conversation, it's always talking about ring fencing the delegated SEND budget, and it's not been increased in line with inflation. It's just still been the same since 2009. And so that, as we mentioned, SENCOs get access to it, so it can be used for children without EHCPs. What are your plans in this area?
Yeah, great question. So I think on this, we understand how how schools spend their budgets on supporting all of their pupils with special educational needs and disabilities is really important, and we know can make a huge difference in terms of intervening early to avoid the escalation of needs and, of course, costs later on. And this is not an uncontroversial position either. And we saw, is before my time at the department, but I understand we sought views on this in 2019 around ring fencing, and that not everyone agreed that ring fencing a SEND budget was the answer for a number of reasons. I think there have been some changes since then. So since then, for example,
and sorry, you sought views in 2019. Who, not you personally, who was asked?
So I could get you all of that information because it was before my time. I haven't got that data to hand, but I can certainly get it from the team, and I can furnish you with information in terms of the reasons why people thought it wasn't a good idea, as well as why they thought it was. My understanding, it was the views were mixed, and I can certainly get that information for you. But I think there have been some significant changes since 2019. So, for example, the significant increases in the overall schools budget, and of course, currently consulting on how the SEND budget would look like in the future when every school receives, as in terms of mainstream school, receives its allocation through the national funding formula. And that consultation is open until early September. And again, I'd encourage people to take part in that.
With the bringing in of digital plans, what reassurances can be made about confidentiality for families, and that parents facing digital poverty who may only have a pay-as-you-go mobile, for example, are not further disadvantaged?
It's a really good question, and one that I know the team have thought about, and one that I haven't probably given as much attention as I should have done on this specific issue yet. And I'll be interested to hear the views of parents and carers as part of the consultation response. So you're right to point out that we're currently consulting on the proposal to digitize the EHCP process and the templates that we use, so there's more consistency. And we will absolutely ensure that there are appropriate controls in place so that the plan cannot be changed without parent or carer input, and that there will be a really clear audit trail of previous decisions and amendments. I completely get why there is and understand, speaking with parents, why there is a lack of trust at present, and that's something that it has been eroded over many years, and I'm conscious it's going to take us time to build that back. And of course, trust is built by deed, not just word. So in terms of the proposal and the process, of course, it will take account of GDPR, so the General Data Protection Regulations, and things like information sharing protocols. And then in terms of the sort of access to sort of technology and kit, I don't want us to be in a position where any parent is disadvantaged through the digitization of EHCPs. The ambition and intention is the opposite. We want it to be far easier for parents and carers to access this process. And so look, I will really carefully consider the needs of those experiencing digital poverty or those without access to appropriate devices. And a commitment that I can make is I will continue to work with parents, carers, and of course professionals to make sure that they can submit and importantly access all of that relevant information required as part of a digital EHCP process in as streamlined a way as possible, that is as easy as possible for them to navigate. And then I suppose the only final thing I'd say is that, because as you know, at the heart of everything I'm trying to do here is sort of co-production. And I'm really clear with the team here that I want documentation to be co-produced with parents, carers, children and young people. And that's absolutely vital if we're going to ensure those digital templates that we produce are not just user-friendly, but importantly, they're really accessible too.
I guess one of the things to remember is that people who don't have access to devices or the internet are going to struggle to respond to this consultation. So you won't necessarily get their input whilst developing this. So it's probably worth, and also any kind of going forwards, any plans to co-produce has to be accessible for everyone.
Look, I get that, and there are of course other ways in which people can take part online, they can email, they can write in. There are other ways in which people can take part in the consultation too, and likewise, if there are members and other people that that you support and that you work with that are struggling in any way to access the consultation, please let us know, because I genuinely want the views of everybody, because that's the only way we're going to get this right.
Well, Quince, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. We know you're a busy man, and we know that parents will find this very enlightening, and it will probably prompt a whole load more questions, which is lucky because we've got the webinar coming up in which they can actually ask them. So we look forward to seeing you again very soon for that.
Thank you very much.
If you need help with understanding and responding to the consultation, visit specialneedsjungle.com/send review, where you will find all the links to the DFE consultation and obviously our own resources as well. Once again, Mr. Quince, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Lovely to see you.